Why was the rifle tossed at her like trash? The captain hadn't even looked at her when he did it. The MRAD slid across the steel table, heavy, awkward, the kind of weapon most soldiers treated like sacred equipment. But to him, in that moment, it was nothing but a jammed piece of metal, good for blame, not battle. Maybe the girl scout from Intel can figure it out, he muttered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Laughter followed, sharp and cutting, the kind of laughter that didn't come from humor but from dismissal. Staff Sergeant didn't laugh. She just looked at the rifle, her hands steady, her hazel eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring not just the weapon but the weight of the insult. Nobody noticed the quiet calculation she made when dust swirled near the briefing tent, the way her eyes tracked wind drift unconsciously, the way her breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm she had trained her entire life to control. Nobody saw the faint trace of a tattoo wrapped around her trigger finger, scope rings, permanent, etched into skin. They only saw the cover story. The analyst, the intel girl, the one shuffling papers and briefing slides. But there was something they didn't know, something she hadn't told them, not yet. She picked up the rifle, heavy, 30 pounds of precision engineering rendered useless by grit and neglect. The extractor had failed, she guessed, even before she opened the chamber. Fine Afghan dust could kill a weapon faster than bullets. Her hands worked quietly, efficiently, stripping it down while the men around her traded jokes. She said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that silence could be sharper than any reply. Her grandfather's voice flickered in her head, the Montana ranch air still alive in memory. Don't explain yourself to people who already decided who you are. Prove it when it matters. The captain had no idea that 43 minutes later, he'd be holding out a coin with a shaking hand. His team alive only because the so-called Girl Scout had done what none of them could. But that moment hadn't come yet, not yet. For now she let them believe the story they wanted, that she was just another support soldier tucked into fob Chapman, buried in screens and satellite feeds. It was safer that way, safer for her, safer for the record books, because her name wasn't supposed to appear in combat reports, not officially, not ever. At 29 stood barely 56 in her boots, lean muscle built from years of carrying the same rifle across. She didn't look like the myth she would become. She looked ordinary, almost forgettable. And maybe that was her greatest weapon. People dismissed her, underestimated her, overlooked her, which meant she could act before anyone realized what she truly was. Most saw her as an analyst, a desk soldier. What they didn't see was the long lineage etched into her bones. Gunnery Sergeant Thomas, her grandfather, had put a rifle in her hands before she could drive. Summers were not campfires and video games for her, but hours spent lying prone in hot grass, watching mirage bend through the scope of an old Mark V reading wind, measuring distance, learning patience. Between heartbeats, he told her once, pressing her finger gently against a cold trigger, is where the truth lives. You want to make the perfect shot, find the silence between. That silence had followed her ever since. At 18 she enlisted, not to prove anything, not even for recognition. She did it because the world seemed fragile, breakable, and she wanted to be the one standing between chaos and the people who never saw it coming. The Army Marksmanship Unit noticed her almost immediately. She wasn't just good, she was unexplainable. In shifting winds, she hit 27 consecutive targets at 1,000 meters. Men twice her size, twice her years of experience couldn't match it. That day, a Delta commander pulled her file. That day, her path changed forever. But skill wasn't enough. The Army still wasn't ready to see women in roles that required direct combat, so they hid her, buried her under the title of intelligence analyst. She briefed missions in the daylight, and then at night she provided the overwatch that never made the reports. Every shot she fired was erased, credited to someone else, tucked away in sealed documents. She became a ghost with no record. And yet the ghost saved lives. 43 Americans owed their return home to shots fired by hands no one acknowledged. Afghan girls walked safely to school because she had ended the threat before he reached them. Wives hugged husbands who never knew how close death had come. Still, she remained invisible. She told herself it didn't matter, that medals and recognition weren't the reason. But some nights when the base quieted, when the only sound was wind against tin walls, the weight of it pressed harder than the rifle she carried. Being unseen was safety, but it was also erasure. And then Captain arrived. Fresh from Fort Campbell, loud and confident, he carried himself like war was a stage and he was born to perform. His ODA team followed his lead, swagger sharp enough to cut the air. At the operations brief, when pointed out the dead space, a gap in Overwatch that could swallow an entire team if enemy fighters moved unseen, he cut her off mid-sentence, told her to stick to PowerPoints, said real shooters didn't need advice from analysts. The room fell silent. Even the interpreter shifted uncomfortably. Only Master Sergeant Williams tried to intervene, reminding she wasn't what she appeared, but pulled rank. Pride, louder than caution. Said nothing, she'd been here before, dismissed, ignored, buried. But in the quiet of her mind, something sharpened. She wasn't angry. Anger wasted focus. She was waiting. Because her grandfather had been right. Pride gets people killed. And in Afghanistan, pride had a short half-life. That night when the mission launched, she stayed back as expected inside the Tactical Operations Center, headphones on, screens lit. From there she could hear everything, every breath over the comms, every panic-coded call. She heard it all. And when the ambush came, when the dead space she had warned them about erupted with gunfire and RPG trails, whence voice cracked over the net calling for precision fire they couldn't deliver, she knew. Her hand drifted to the rifle beside her, the one she had rebuilt 17 times, cleaned until it gleamed like glass, maintained not with duty but with devotion. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath, hearing her grandfather again. You shoot to protect those who can't protect themselves, whether they respect you or not. Her decision was already made. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't need it. She would not watch them die because of pride. She grabbed her kit, slung the rifle, and headed for the tower. And in that moment, no one knew it yet, but history had already shifted. What did pride sound like when it began to break? It wasn't loud, not at first. It was the hesitation in a voice that had been certain only hours earlier. It was the clipped words over the radio, the tightening throat when calls for support went unanswered. Captain had swaggered into Afghanistan believing war bent to command. By the time the ambush began, the truth was already rewriting him. The valley should have been quiet. It was always quiet just before chaos. His team had inserted by, landing under moonlight, the sound of rotor blades fatting until even the dust seemed to settle. They moved fast, confident, establishing their positions exactly as briefed, exactly as he had insisted. At 3:47, the silence tore open. The first bursts came from PKM machine guns, high cyclic rate, chewing through stone and soil, sparks kicking from the walls where two operators tried to dive for cover. RPG trails arced like lightning against the night. Shouts cut through the net, overlapping, frantic, a dozen voices crashing into each other. Contact North Ridge. Multiple shooters. Taking effective fire. Sergeant Peters, designated marksman, returned shots where he could, but his SR-25 wasn't reaching far enough. The Taliban fighters weren't close. They were clever, positioned in the exact dead ground had warned about. Hidden angles, lines of fire the Americans couldn't touch. Worse, the team's issued MRAD, the precision rifle meant for ranges like this, was unreliable. Dust had worked its way into the chamber. The extractor refused to grip spent cases. Rounds fired, cases stuck, rhythm shattered. In combat, seconds meant survival. The weapon turned seconds into death. Rifle down, malfunction, can't clear it, Peter's voice broke. We've got two pinned. QRF is 23 minutes out, the JTAC reported, voice strained. Apache weathered, grounded 40 miles south. No air support inbound. 23 minutes. In an ambush like this, 23 minutes wasn't time. It was a death sentence. Inside the Tactical Operations Center heard it all. The crack of gunfire bleeding faintly through headsets. The panic in voices she didn't recognize yet knew too well. Kids, really, most of them younger than her. Someone was already calling for medevac. Tourniquet applied. Morphine administered. Words clinical, but the undertone was always the same, bleeding out. She didn't flinch, not outwardly, but inside she felt the weight. These were people. Sons, brothers, fathers. She thought of wives who didn't know yet. Mothers still asleep back home, dreaming safe dreams, unaware of what midnight had delivered here. And then's voice cracked through the net. Desperation ragged around the edges. We need precision fire now, or we're going to have to push through open ground. Everyone knew what that meant. Suicide. Dragging wounded across a valley with machine guns trained on every angle. At that moment, Master Sergeant Williams grabbed by the plate carrier, dragging him toward the TOC like a man shaking sense into another. Looked up from her console, headset still on, eyes locked on the captain who had dismissed her hours earlier. Williams didn't mince words. You want to die with your pride intact, or you want to live knowing a woman saved your team. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunfire. Froze, his face shifted through disbelief, anger, humiliation, then something closer to fear. His men were dying. His rifle was useless. The analyst he had mocked was the only one with the skill to reach those hidden. Didn't wait for his answer, she didn't need it. She stood, slung her rifle, and gathered her gear. Every movement smooth, practiced like ritual. Her hands were steady, her heartbeat slowed, her mind quiet. The decision was already made. The walk across the compound was short, but the distance felt different now. The air at 7,200 feet bit colder, thinner. Every step was weighted with consequence. If she failed, no report would soften it. If she succeeded, no report would record it. Ghosts weren't meant to exist on paper. Appeared at the tower ladder before she reached it, his arm out like a barrier, shouting about chain of command, operational integrity. His words meant nothing against the chaos still echoing over the radio. Williams moved him aside, blunt and unyielding. Get on the net, Captain. Vector her onto targets, or start writing letters to families. For the first time, didn't argue. His voice didn't carry rank anymore. It carried survival. Climbed gear heavy on her frame. 52 pounds of rifle, plates, ammo. At the top, the world opened. The valley stretched wide beneath starlight, jagged ridges carving shadows across the earth. And there, faint flashes, muzzle bursts, movement where no movement should be. Through her and Bender 525X scope, the battlefield became precise, defined, alive with enemy intent. 13 fighters, elevated, superior positions, exactly as predicted. The wind was gusting, full value, 8 to 12 knots from the northwest. Distance to the furthest target, 1,347 meters. Every variable logged in her mind automatically, her body already adjusting, calculating, settling into rhythm. She tried MRAD first. Immediate malfunction. A spent casing stuck stubbornly in the chamber, extractor useless. She set it aside without frustration. She had expected nothing else. Her hands found her own rifle, the one she had rebuilt, cleaned, and cared for with the devotion of a surgeon to their instruments, the one she trusted more than the words of any captain. Her breath steadied. The first target was a machine gunner, firing in bursts that pinned men against stone. She adjusted 3.2 mils elevation, 0.8 right. Squeeze. The PKM went silent. The fighter dropped. Return fire erupted instantly, rounds cracking past the tower, snapping through air close enough to taste. She didn't flinch. Second target, 1,100 meters, moving left to right. She led by half a body width, adjusted 2.4 mils elevation. Squeeze. Hit. On the nets, men reported lessening fire, relief in their voices, hope bleeding through panic. They could move, they could breathe. But saw more. 11 fighters still maneuvering, spreading, preparing to cut off retreat. They weren't just attacking. They were shaping the battlefield, setting up for massacre not just team but the quick reaction force inbound. The Taliban weren't reckless. They were calculating too. She counted seconds, 40 maybe less before the trap closed fully. This was the moment, the line between shooters and something else entirely. Her grandfather had called it the silence between seconds. And she entered it now. Breathing slowed, heartbeat softened. The chaos outside dimmed until only the scope remained, the world narrowed to crosshairs and motion. She wasn't thinking, she wasn't reacting, she was being. Target 3, RPG gunner 700 meters, weapon raised 12 seconds from firing. Squeeze. He fell backward, rocket unfired. Target 4, then 5, then 6. Fighters rushing through a wadi trying to flank, 4 shots, 4 heartbeats, 4 bodies down. Her hands moved as if guided by something beyond instinct. Through the net's voice, wounded moving, can you maintain suppression? Her reply was the next shot. Target 8 tried to recover the PKM. She destroyed the weapon with a single round through the receiver, metal and man crumpling together. Target 9, a spotter hidden behind rocks, binoculars lifted. Distance, 1,411 meters. She waited. Wind dipped for half a breath. She sent it. Precision at the edge of impossible. Targets 10 and 11 broke cover simultaneously. 2 shots, 3 seconds apart, both fell. And just like that, the valley shifted. From chaos to silence. From certain death to improbable survival. The last 2 fighters turned and ran, vanishing toward the border, their will to fight shattered. She let them go. Enough blood had filled the dirt tonight. The net crackled again. Men were moving. The wounded were still breathing. The quick reaction force inbound would find no resistance when they arrived. Exhaled long and steady, lowering her cheek from the stock. Her body was calm, but her soul was not untouched. She had taken lives, yes, but she had preserved more. The equation was brutal, necessary. She wiped sweat from her brow, adjusted her scope, and scanned once more. Clear, for now. Down below's voice no longer cracked. It was quiet, almost reverent. Because he knew, they all knew. The girl scout from Intel had just saved them all. How quiet could a battlefield become when the shooting stopped? It wasn't silence. Not really. It was the sound of breath still ragged in men who had survived what they weren't supposed to. The scrape of boots dragging the wounded toward extraction. The faint metallic click of rifles being checked again and again, just to reassure trembling hands that they still worked. For Captain's team, silence was survival. They had walked through death and stepped out the other side only because someone they hadn't trusted had carried them there. From her position in the tower, stayed still for several minutes after the last shot. Her cheek rested lightly against the rifle stock, scope sweeping across the valley, refusing to believe in peace too quickly. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. But inside, in the places she never let anyone see, a tremor began to build. Not fear, not yet. Something deeper. The weight of what she had done and what she would never be allowed to admit. Finally, she lowered the rifle, checked her magazine, cleared the chamber. Mechanical movements. Ritual, really. Every soldier had one. The things you did not because you needed to, but because you couldn't imagine not doing them. For her, the weapon always came first. By the time the QRF thundered overhead, their door gunners scanning for a fight already ended, was gone from the tower. She slipped down the ladder before anyone thought to thank her, blending back into the compound, a shadow resuming its cover. The operators came in with stretchers, bloodied but alive. Medics swarmed. Shouts filled the landing zone. Relief mixed with adrenaline in a frenzy of motion. In all that chaos, nobody looked for the intel sergeant who had delivered them, which was exactly the way it had always been. Hours passed. The sun climbed over the ridges, throwing sharp light across the fob, revealing the dust, the wear, the fatigue etched into every surface. Sat alone in the arms room, stripped-down rifle across her lap, cleaning kits spread out in meticulous order. Each spring, each pin, each polished groove. She moved with patience, careful and precise. Not one screw turned without purpose. Her grandfather's voice lingered as she worked. A weapon isn't just steel, it's trust. Treat it like it breathes. Fail it and it'll fail you. She never failed it, and tonight it hadn't failed her. The door creaked open. Captain stood in the frame, shoulders slumped, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He looked older than he had yesterday, as if a single night had carved years into his face. His hand trembled faintly, though he tried to hide it by clenching into a fist. For a long time he said nothing, just stared at her, at the rifle in pieces across the table, at the calm with which she moved, as if she hadn't just carried his team out of death's jaws. Finally he reached into his pocket, metal clinked. A coin rested in his palm, small, worn, but heavy with meaning. Team 519's challenge coin, given rarely, given only when words could not hold the weight of gratitude. He stepped closer, extending it toward her. No speech, no apology, no excuse for the things he had said, the way he had dismissed her, just a coin pressed into her hand with a grip that shook more from emotion than adrenaline. For a moment their eyes locked. She didn't smile, he didn't ask for forgiveness. The silence between them said enough. Then he sat heavily on an ammo crate, the weight of the night pressing him down. He put his face in his hands. She looked away, giving him the dignity of unraveling privately. Pride had broken. Survival remained. When he finally left, the coin stayed in her hand, warm from his grip, cool from hers. She turned it slowly between fingers, studying the engraving. A simple marker of respect. But to her, it felt like proof that sometimes, even ghosts left traces. Still, she knew how the report would read. Already, the wording was forming in her mind. Emergency marksmanship support provided by attached intelligence personnel. No name, no recognition, just a line buried in an after-action file nobody would ever see. She would remain invisible. And yet, word of mouth would travel faster than any report. Operators talked. Whispers carried. A legend didn't need paper. It lived in the retelling, the hushed respect traded between men who had seen the impossible. She cleaned the final piece of her rifle, reassembled it with practiced ease, bolts sliding smooth into place. When she shouldered it once more, it felt whole again. But she was not entirely. Alone in the arms room, she allowed herself what she never showed anyone else. The tremor in her hands finally came, small but real. She pressed them against her thighs, willing them steady. Her mind replayed the shots not with pride but with weight. 11 lives taken. 11 men who had mothers, wives, children. She told herself, as she always did, that they had chosen their path, that each round fired had spared countless more. And she believed it. She had to. But the math of killing was never clean. She remembered the one who had carried binoculars, a spotter, just a man with glass scanning, calling fire, not even holding a weapon in that second. Did his family know what he had been? Did they believe he was a soldier, a martyr, a villain? Did it matter? She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw her grandfather again. His weathered face, the creases at his eyes from both sun and sorrow. Pride kills, but so does hesitation. You won't always have clean choices, but you'll always have to live with them. Her breath caught once and then steadied. She picked up the coin again, rubbing the edge with her thumb. A coin wasn't recognition, not in the official sense, but it was something rarer. It was respect, raw and unpolished. The kind that couldn't be faked. Maybe that was enough. Outside, the fob came alive again. Helicopters rotated, vehicles fueled. Another mission already being planned. War didn't pause to process. War moved forward, indifferent to who carried what scars. But men would remember. Himself would never forget. And though her name would never be typed into any report, she had carved herself into their lives permanently. A ghost, yes, but a ghost who mattered. That night, lying on her bunk, she held the coin in her palm until sleep finally found her. She didn't dream of medals. She didn't dream of glory. She dreamed of Montana fields, of wind whispering through tall grass, of a rifle steady in her hands and her grandfather's voice reminding her that between heartbeats lived truth. And somewhere in the quiet she realized something. Sometimes dignity didn't demand acknowledgement. Sometimes dignity didn't even speak. It acted and let the silence carry the weight. Why did the whispers matter more than the reports? Because reports vanished, buried under classification, filed into digital drawers never opened again. But whispers lived. They breathed in barracks, carried in the pauses between missions, traveling faster than rotor blades and more reliably than radio waves. Within days of the ambush, felt the change. Not in official ways, not in documents or acknowledgments. The after-action review mentioned her contribution only once, and even then without name. An attached analyst provided emergency long-range fire support. That was all, clinical, distant, erased. But in the chow hall, silence spread differently when she entered. Men who had laughed at the captain's Girl Scout remark 2 weeks earlier now glanced up, then quickly away, unsure how to carry the weight of what they owed. No one said thank you. No one dared. Yet the air felt heavier, loaded with unspoken respect. On the range, she noticed Peters, the designated marksman whose rifle had failed, watching her more closely. Not with envy, with humility. He asked quiet questions about her rifle maintenance, about wind calls, about holdovers. Questions that didn't come from bravado, but from someone who had faced failure and lived only because someone else hadn't. She answered simply. No lectures, no arrogance, just knowledge passed, plain and sharp. And still she kept her distance, because she knew the truth. Respect earned in whispers was fragile. It lived only in those who had seen, not in systems or institutions. Officially, she remained invisible. The weeks blurred. Missions rotated. Team deployed again and again, each time carrying the shadow of what had nearly broken them. Each time returning alive. Remained in the TOC, monitoring, advising, always unseen, her rifle never far. At night, when the compound quieted, she walked the perimeter alone, boots crunching gravel, air thin, cold at elevation. She breathed steady, scanning the ridges where she had once laid crosshairs over lives she would never forget. She told herself she wasn't haunted, only sharpened, but the line was thin. 3 weeks after the ambush, the helicopter came. It arrived midday, rotors kicking dust across the landing zone, sending papers swirling inside the operations center. Men paused, curious, as a tall figure stepped out, his uniform crisp despite the Afghan grime, presence commanding without needing volume. Command Sergeant Major Roberts. His reputation had reached even these mountains before he did. Fort's steel spine, decades in special operations, the kind of leader who carried authority like gravity. Wherever he walked, men straightened unconsciously, not from fear but from recognition. He didn't waste time. He didn't ask permission. Within minutes he was in the TOC, scanning, speaking in low tones with Williams, with the detachment commander. Stayed at her station, eyes on her screen, pretending disinterest while every nerve tightened. Robert's gaze found her eventually, not casual, intentional. He studied her for a moment longer than necessary. She felt it. The way some men looked at targets before pulling a trigger, calculated, decisive. By evening, word spread. Roberts wasn't here to observe. He was here with orders. Learned the truth in the arms room, her rifle across her lap as always. The door opened, and there he was, filling the space with a presence that didn't need sound. "Staff Sergeant," he said simply. His voice wasn't sharp. It was steady, the kind of tone that carried weight without effort. She stood, instinctive, posture perfect. He glanced at the rifle pieces laid out on the table, then at her. 17 rebuilds, correct. She blinked. 18, Sergeant Major. A flicker of approval crossed his face. Good, I need you at. She frowned, uncertain. For what purpose, Sergeant Major? Robert stepped closer, lowering his voice though no one else was in the room. Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. You're going to train the next generation. Quietly. No credits retroactive. No public recognition. But you'll shape shooters who'll save lives long after you're gone from the field. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had prepared for dismissal, for being hidden again, for fading back into the shadows where she had always been kept. But this was different. This was exile and honor and burden all at once. Train others, pass it on, become the ghost that made others sharper. Why me? She asked quietly. Roberts didn't hesitate. Because whispers don't lie, and because I've read enough reports with your fingerprints all over them, even if your name was never typed. We don't waste talent, Staff Sergeant, we use it, even if we never admit it. For a moment, silence stretched. She searched his face for any crack, any hint of condescension. There was none, only conviction. Finally she nodded. Yes, Sergeant Major. His eyes softened just slightly. It won't be easy. They won't all respect you at first, but when they see, they'll know, and they'll remember that's enough. Then he left, as swiftly as he'd come, leaving only the echo of new orders in his wake. That night sat on her bunk with the coin had given her in one hand and the transfer orders in the other. The two objects felt like opposites, yet the same. One personal, whispered. The other official, sealed. Both carried weight. She thought of Montana again, of long summers under open sky, her grandfather teaching her that breathing was life, that silence was truth. He had never spoken of medals. He had never spoken of recognition. Only of responsibility. Maybe this was responsibility, to carry what she had learned into others, to ensure that the next time a team faced the valley, someone would already be ready. Still, part of her ached, because leaving the field meant leaving the fight, and she wasn't sure she was ready to become a ghost in a classroom. She didn't sleep much. Dawn came quickly. At breakfast, sat across from her for the first time. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His eyes flicked to the coin in her pocket, then to her face. Respect, unspoken but solid. That was enough. By the time the helicopter lifted her from Chapman, carrying her away from the mountains, whispers followed. Operators who didn't know her name still knew her story. The intel sergeant who wasn't an intel sergeant. The ghost who had saved a team with impossible precision. Her record would never show it, but legends didn't need records. And as the fob disappeared beneath her, held the coin in her hand and whispered to herself the truth she had always known. Skill has no gender. Respect has no rank. Dignity doesn't need permission. It just acts. Why did the hangar go so quiet when she walked in? Because she wasn't what they expected. New instructors usually carried themselves with swagger, chest out, ready to dominate a room before they'd even spoken. But the woman who stepped into the Special Operations Target Interdiction Course briefing at Fort didn't swagger. She moved with quiet precision, her presence sharper because it didn't demand attention. Some of the students glanced at her, then quickly back at each other. Whispers, smirks, disbelief. A female staff sergeant assigned to teach sniping at the most elite course in the military. They'd seen women in the army before, of course. But here, in a place where every man carried the weight of deployments, where the standard was impossibly high. It didn't add up. Felt the stares but ignored them. She always had. She carried her issued binder, placed it neatly on the instructor's desk and stood waiting, not rushing, not trying to prove anything in the first breath, just waiting. The senior instructor cleared his throat. You'll be training under multiple cadre while you're here. Staff sergeant will be one of them. You'll treat her the way you treat any instructor, with respect." The way he said it made the challenge clear. Respect wasn't guaranteed. The students muttered under their breath. One of them, tall, broad, the kind of man who thought size equaled authority, smirked openly, caught it in her periphery. She didn't react. Instead, she began. "Range tomorrow, 0600. Bring every round you've been issued." Her voice was calm, steady, without a hint of demand. Some of the men blinked, surprised at how ordinary she sounded, almost soft, almost forgettable. But the way she said it left no room for argument. The next morning, the range came alive before the sun had burned off the dew. Steel targets stretched from 200 to 1,400 meters. Wind flags rippled. Mirage shimmered faintly above the ground as the air began to heat. Stood at the line, her rifle slung, clipboard in hand. The students took positions, checking gear, whispering jokes to mask nerves. She let them. Soldiers always tried to test their instructors in the first days, always tried to measure boundaries. She waited. When the first man fired, his shot rang wide at 800 meters, kicking dust a foot off target. His spotter cursed under his breath, adjusting. Another missed, then another. Moved down the line, quiet, observant, eyes scanning positions. She didn't criticize, didn't bark, just watched, hands folded behind her back. Finally, one of the younger shooters muttered, not low enough, "What's she even doing here? I've seen better shooting in the deer woods back home." The words cut through the line. Some laughed, some stayed silent. The senior instructor's jaw tightened, but he didn't step in. This was her moment to claim or lose. Paused. She set her clipboard down carefully, unslung her rifle, and moved to the open firing lane. The students went quiet, curiosity overtaking mockery. She lay prone, movement smooth, unhurried. She adjusted the bipod, checked her scope, and then looked up at the wind flags. One glance, that was all. Her breathing slowed, her cheek settled against the stock. The valley stretched before her, targets gleaming under the morning sun. The furthest steel was barely visible to the naked eye, a plate at 1,400 meters. Most shooters didn't attempt it this early in training. Mirage and crosswinds made it unpredictable. She didn't hesitate. 3 breaths, 1 heartbeat, trigger squeeze. The crack echoed, the round sailing almost invisible until a sharp clang answered across the valley. Direct hit. The students stared. She worked the bolt, chambering the next round with practiced ease. Adjusted, shifted half a mil, squeezed again. Another clang, then another, 3 in a row. The tall, broad student who had smirked yesterday was watching now, his mouth slightly open. Rolled her cheek from the stock, exhaled softly, and stood. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply slung the rifle and picked up her clipboard again. Every miss you fire is information. Mirage, wind, your own heartbeat. Learn from it. Ignore it and people die. Again at 1,000 meters. Move. Her voice cut sharper now. Not angry, not loud, just final. The students scrambled back into position. Nobody laughed anymore. By the end of the day, targets at every distance had been painted with hits. Not all clean, not all pretty, but improving. Walked the line, correcting quietly, teaching the way her grandfather had taught her. Breath, silence, rhythm. She didn't tell stories about Afghanistan. Didn't brag about the ambush she had ended. She didn't need to. She carried battlefield truth in the way she taught. Every correction came not from theory but from experience carved into her bones. When the day ended, one of the younger soldiers approached hesitantly. He held his rifle awkwardly, like a kid holding a heavy truth. "Staff Sergeant," he said, not meeting her eyes at first. "How'd you know the wind like that? You barely looked." Studied him for a moment, then answered simply, "Because I've missed before, and I've never forgotten what it cost." The soldier swallowed, nodded, and walked away, silent. That night, alone in her quarters, she cleaned her rifle again, piece by piece, methodical. But her mind wasn't in Afghanistan anymore. It was here, in North Carolina, surrounded by men who didn't believe until they saw. She wondered if that would ever change. Still, the day had ended differently than it began. The smirks were gone, the whispers had shifted, and somewhere in the silence between shots, she had begun shaping something larger than herself. A new generation of shooters, a legacy she hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. On her desk's coin rested beside her orders. She picked it up, turning it between fingers. Respect earned one shot at a time. The coin was heavy, but not as heavy as the responsibility it represented. She set it down carefully, aligned square with the edge of the desk. Then she whispered to herself, the way she always did before sleep. Between heartbeats. Why did one student keep missing, even when the wind was calm? Because not all misses came from the barrel, some came from within. It was week 3 at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course, and the class had begun to fracture into the predictable groups. The naturals, who absorbed corrections quickly and let instinct build upon training. The grinders, who sweated every adjustment, stubbornly refusing to quit until the steel rang. And then there were the ones who looked perfect on paper, but faltered under invisible weight. Private First Class was one of those. On the surface, he had everything: young, athletic, disciplined. He kept his rifle spotless, knew his math cold, repeated the formulas for wind calls like scripture. And yet, every time his finger touched the trigger at distance, the shot pulled wide. Not by much, but by enough. Noticed it by the second day. She watched the way his jaw tightened just before firing, the faint tremor in his shoulders. She recognized it instantly because she had seen it in herself years ago. Not hesitation, not fear, guilt. She let him miss for 2 days, saying nothing. The other students muttered about him, frustrated when he slowed their relay times. He bore it silently, shame tightening his features. Finally, after another string of misses at 1,000 meters, crouched beside him. "What do you see?" she asked. Swallowed, eyes pressed against the scope. Steel plate, 900 meters, wind left to right 6 knots. And his voice caught. "And I see a man, even though it's just steel. I can't stop thinking that if it were real, he'd never even know it was coming." The other students glanced over, curious. Raised her hand sharply, a signal: focus forward, leave him be. She lowered her voice. "Do you think about who might die if you miss?" He blinked, surprised. "I know I never." "You should," she interrupted softly. "Every shot has weight, but you don't carry that weight by avoiding it. You carry it by accepting why you're pulling the trigger in the first place." His jaw clenched. "How do you live with it?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the rifle between them. His mind flashed to the valley in Afghanistan. 11 lives ended in under an hour. 11 men who had mothers, families, names she never knew. She remembered the spotter with binoculars, the way he fell backward, silent. She remembered cleaning her rifle in the arms room later, hands trembling only when no one was watching. Her reply was quiet. "By remembering the lives I saved, every time, every single time." Nodded slowly, tears threatening at the edges but never falling. He adjusted his scope. Breath steady, trigger squeeze. The steel rang. Not a perfect center, but true enough. Stood moving down the line. She didn't smile, but inside she felt the faint stir of something like hope. Because it wasn't enough to make shooters. She had to make soldiers who understood the cost. That same week, another test came, but from the opposite end of the spectrum. Staff sergeant, older, experienced, arrogant. He had deployed before, carried himself with the easy swagger of someone who thought he had nothing left to learn. His shooting was strong, consistent, but his pride was louder than his precision. When corrected his position one afternoon, just a small adjustment of elbow angle, he smirked. "With respect, Staff Sergeant," he said, voice dripping sarcasm. "I've been on 2 deployments. I know how to hold a rifle." The line went still. Everyone heard it, everyone waited. Looked at him evenly. "Good, then you'll know how to listen." Chuckled under his breath. "Or maybe you just got lucky once." The words hit harder than a round. She froze, not outwardly but inside, because she knew exactly what he meant. The whispers had reached even here. The story of the ambush carried half-truth, half-legend. Some believed, some doubted, clearly fell into the latter. For a long moment she said nothing. Then without a word she walked to the firing line, unrolled her mat and lay prone. Her rifle was already zeroed, already familiar. She didn't check wind flags, didn't range the target. She simply breathed. The steel at 1,200 meters gleamed in the midday heat. Mirage danced like liquid. Most shooters would hesitate. She didn't. One shot, clang. She worked the bolt, chambered again. Another shot, clang. 5 rounds in 12 seconds, every one a hit. She rolled her cheek off the stock, stood, and slung the rifle without looking at. "You don't have to believe me," she said softly, almost like an afterthought. "But you will respect the weapon, and the weapon doesn't lie." The line stayed silent, looked away, jaw tight. Didn't smile, she didn't need to. Respect wasn't won in arguments, it was won in steel. That night in the barracks, the students didn't whisper about her gender anymore. They whispered about her precision, about the way she made shots look effortless, like breathing, about the way she didn't rise to bait, didn't seek applause, just acted and let silence follow. Slowly they began to change. When hit his next string cleanly, the others clapped his shoulder, no mockery this time. When adjusted his elbow exactly the way she had corrected him, no one called him out. Respect, fragile and unspoken, began to grow. And felt something shift inside herself too. She had thought training would feel like exile. A step away from the fight, a burial under responsibility she hadn't asked for. But as she watched these men, proud, stubborn, broken, determined, she realized she was shaping more than shooters. She was shaping futures. The battlefield would claim some of them. That was truth. But maybe, because of her, more would come home than otherwise would have. That night, sitting alone in her quarters, she held coin again, turned it between her fingers, remembered the weight of that valley. She whispered to the coin, as if to the men who had lived because of it, "Your lives weren't mine alone. They'll save others now. That's how it works." For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. Because ghosts didn't just haunt. Sometimes ghosts taught. Why did the call come for her, when she wasn't supposed to be in the fight anymore? Because sometimes ghosts were needed in daylight. It was late in the second month of training when the knock came on her door at Fort, sharp, urgent, the kind of knock that didn't wait for sleep. "Staff Sergeant, Ops wants you." She dressed quickly, sliding into her uniform, slinging her rifle almost on instinct. She wasn't sure why she took it. She was an instructor now, not an operator. But something inside her told her she might need it. At the operations center, Command Sergeant Major Roberts stood waiting. His face was unreadable, eyes locked on the map spread across the table. A red marker circled a point in the Middle East, a valley not unlike Afghanistan, a mission not unlike the one she thought she had left behind. He didn't waste time. "Our shooters are pinned, QRFs delayed, same scenario you've seen before." His eyes lifted to hers. "We've got 2 instructors flying with a small cadre to pull them out. You're on the bird." Her stomach tightened. She wasn't supposed to. This wasn't her role anymore. But Roberts' tone left no room for argument. By nightfall, she was airborne, rotors chopping through darkness, the weight of deployment pressing down on her shoulders again. Around her sat 6 students from her course, including and wide-eyed, tense, carrying rifles they had learned to trust but had never fired under true fire. They looked to her, though none spoke. They knew the whispers now. They knew the story, and now they would see if it was real. The insertion came fast and hard. Dust whipped through the valley as boots hit the ground, rifles raised, eyes scanning. Immediate gunfire cracked from the ridges, suppressing their movement. The pinned team was 200 meters ahead, trapped in a compound under relentless fire. "Positions," Roberts barked. The students scrambled, adrenaline raw. Shots rang, but wild, their nerves betraying them. Steel targets didn't shoot back. Mirage on a range didn't kill friends. Dropped prone, scope already sweeping. She spotted muzzle flashes across the ridge, 4 fighters, machine guns cutting arcs of suppression. Range, 1,180 meters. Wind, full value, 10 knots. She adjusted, breath steady. First shot clang, one machine gun silent. Her students glanced sideways, eyes wide. The myth was moving beside them. Second shot, third. 2 more fighters down before the students even found their holds. "Focus," she hissed softly, not looking up. "Don't watch me, watch your glass, read your wind." The pinned team's comms crackled through the net. "We're black on ammo, holding what we can." Cursed under his breath, struggling with his wind call. His first round went wide, ricocheting harmlessly. He growled, adjusting too far. Shifted slightly, spotting his target for him. "Half a mil left, breath steady, don't think about me, think about them." He gritted his teeth, fired again. This time the steel rang, not perfect, but good enough. 2 lanes down was frozen. His finger hovered over the trigger, his jaw clenched tight. Through her scope, saw what he saw, a fighter silhouetted, not steel, not paper. Flesh and bone. His breath hitched audibly. She remembered his words on the range. "I see a man. I can't stop thinking, he won't even know it's coming." She called, low but firm. "This isn't about him, it's about who he's aiming at. Do you see our guys, 200 meters ahead? You miss, they die, that's your weight, not his." He swallowed hard, adjusted, squeezed. The fighter fell. The pinned team's perimeter held. The firefight stretched, minutes folding into eternity. Fighters maneuvered, trying to encircle, but each time they moved was their first. Her scope tracked them like inevitability, her rounds cutting arcs of survival through the night. Her students followed, shaky at first, then steadier. Pride bent into focus. Guilt shaped into resolve. Together, under her calm voice threading through the chaos, they began to find rhythm. Wind shifting, adjust. Hold higher, you're dipping low. Trust the math, then trust your body. Each command was simple. Each one carried the weight of a battlefield she had already lived through. Finally, the ridge went quiet. The last fighters broke and ran, shadows swallowed by the terrain. Silence fell, heavy, unreal, broken only by the rasp of breath, and the faint crackle of comms confirming the pinned team was alive, moving safe. Lowered her rifle slowly, exhaling. She let her cheek rest against the stock for a long moment before lifting. The students looked at her differently now, not with whispers, not with doubt, with something harder to earn, respect forged under fire. Shook his head, muttering, "You make it look like breathing." Didn't smile. "That's because it is. You just haven't learned how to listen to your breath yet." Stared at his rifle, then at her. "I didn't freeze this time." She met his eyes steady. "No, you didn't, and you won't again." By dawn, the bird lifted them out of the valley. The pinned team was bloodied but alive, their gratitude silent but immense. The students sat in the hum of rotors, exhausted, processing what they had seen. One by one, they glanced at, then at each other. No words, just the quiet realization that the legend wasn't exaggeration. If anything, it had been understated. Back at the official report would read the same as always. Instructors provided support. Mission successful. No casualties. No names. No specifics. No recognition. But in the barracks, the story would grow. The ghost wasn't just a rumor anymore. She was real, and they had seen her. That night in her quarters, cleaned her rifle once again. Ritual, patience. She thought of the students who had fired beside her, who had shaken and missed and then found their rhythm. She thought of her grandfather's voice, steady as ever, between heartbeats. She whispered it aloud, not for herself this time but for them. Between heartbeats they'll remember. Why did legends never have names? Because names could be erased, but stories survived. Months turned to years and still her name never appeared on a single citation. No Valor Award, no official recognition. In files and records, Staff Sergeant remained what she had always been, an analyst, an instructor, a ghost. And yet, across the special operations community, her story spread. Not from documents, not from official channels, from whispers passed from one operator to another, from one class of shooters to the next. They spoke of the woman who saved a team with impossible shots in a valley no one could forget, of the instructor who humbled arrogance without raising her voice, of the ghost who appeared when needed, silent, steady, and then vanished again. Some doubted, some dismissed it as myth, but those who had seen her work, Williams, Roberts, they didn't doubt. They carried her truth like a coin in their pocket. By her 5th year she had trained dozens of shooters who went on to become the quiet guardians of their own teams. Some sent letters back, short and unadorned. "Ma'am, the wind call you drilled into me saved 3 men last night." Others never wrote, but she knew. She could feel it. One night, long after lights out, she sat alone in the empty classroom, the smell of oil and steel lingering in the air. A coin sat on the desk in front of her, its edge worn smooth from years of turning between her fingers. She thought of all the men who had carried it before her. Operators, warriors, men with names written in reports, and now her, not in print but in memory. She remembered the valley in Afghanistan, the way her hands had stayed steady while her soul trembled. She remembered hesitation, arrogance, the way both had shifted under her guidance. She remembered her grandfather, Montana Summers, the silence between heartbeats. She whispered aloud, almost like a prayer. None of it was wasted. Her transfer orders came quietly one spring. New assignment, stateside, a desk role finally official this time, a way of phasing her out without saying it directly. She read them without emotion, folded them neatly, and set them aside. That evening, Roberts came to see her. His hair was grayer now, his face more lined, but his presence hadn't dimmed. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "You've done enough, more than enough." She looked at him evenly. "Enough doesn't bring everyone home." He nodded. "No, but it brings more than would come otherwise. That's all any of us can claim." They didn't speak of medals. They didn't speak of credit. Both knew better. The next morning she packed her gear. The rifle stayed behind, stored in the armory where others would use it, never knowing whose hands had carried it through fire. She kept only the coin. When she stepped out of the barracks for the last time, a few students stood waiting. Not many, just enough. Among them, head bowed slightly in respect he hadn't given anyone before. 2, eyes steady now, no longer haunted by hesitation. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their silence carried more weight than words ever could. She walked past them without ceremony, boots striking pavement in a rhythm that had defined her life for over a decade. Each step felt lighter and heavier all at once. Years later, long after her name had faded from rosters, long after younger soldiers filled the classroom she once taught in, the story still lived. In dusty outposts across the world, operators whispered of her around fire pits. She was real. I saw her. Saved my team. In training ranges, instructors repeated her corrections, though they never said where they had learned them. Between heartbeats. In the quiet moments before a shot, young soldiers who had never met her still carried pieces of her. A phrase, a lesson, a rhythm of breath. She lived on, not in headlines or citations, but in the steel plates that rang true under the hands of men and women she had shaped. Somewhere in Montana, her grandfather's ranch stood empty now, grass bending in the wind, mirage rising in summer heat. If you lay in that grass with a scope, you could almost hear his voice still. Don't rush. Don't flinch. Truth lives in silence. And if you listen harder, you might hear hers too. Not loud, not commanding, just steady. Because dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.